I'm sitting here with the great Zachary Alford, who has played drums with the likes of David Bowie, Bruce Springsteen, Billy Joel, the B-52s, and he's currently on tour with legendary German act Nena. So welcome to Stuttgart, Zachary.
Thank you.
How is the tour with Nena been going so far?
It's been really great. Nena's a fantastic artist, and the band is really just all top-class players. And the music's been fun. We actually have a part of the show that we call the 80s block, where we're doing a bunch of her songs exactly as they were done in the 80s. Yeah. Whereas over the years, you know, the arrangements have changed live, so we're going back to that. So and at first we were, you know, not sure how that was going to work, but it's so fun, and it's just been a great experience all around.
Amazing. To me, I was being born in the early 70s, and Nena was like one of the major stars when I was just starting to listen to radio and stuff in Germany. And back then it was called the new wave of German music or something.
Right.
You know?
I heard about this. There's a few bands from this this genre who were doing really experimental things for German music scene at the time. Yeah. And she's kind of like the one that's still
she's one of the few.
Prominent artists.
That's true. Yeah. That's very true. And certainly things have been, or she has been sort of forgotten for a time period. And then I remember reading an article in German Keyboard magazine a while back, I don't know, maybe 5, 6 or 7 years ago. And it elaborated on the fact that she employed kind of hip keyboard people. So that brought Nena back to my mind, you know. So now that I heard that you're in her touring band, so well, it's interesting. And how did that come about? How did you come into her band?
Well, it's an interesting story because the drummer she's had for many, many years, Van Romain, is a friend of mine.
Okay.
And we go back to the 80s in New York City. So it's just like this kind of old guard of New York drummers who know each other from the scene and kept in touch. And so basically Van, although he's still Nena's drummer, he's very busy doing lots of other projects too. So he asked me if I'd be interested to cover for him for periods that he can't make. And that's basically how that came about.
Okay, interesting. I first heard of you when I saw a documentary about Billy Joel recording his River of Dreams album. That was like in the early 90s, I believe. Was it early? And if I remember correctly, it was Danny Kortchmar who brought you into this session with Billy.
That's right, yeah.
And then next time I remember it was still the heyday of MTV at that time. There was a Bruce Springsteen show on MTV, kind of sort of like not really unplugged, but sort of, I believe it was. Yeah. And you played drums there too.
That's right.
And of course we had David Bowie then in the I guess starting in the late 80s. Right?
Mid 80s, 95.
Yeah. 90s, right. So how did this all come together for you? Like starting out with Danny Kortchmar and then progressing sort of to...
Well, again, you know, I grew up in New York in the end of the last century. And there was a really vibrant music scene there. And just from playing in clubs since I was 14, you meet a lot of people. And so... one guy I met was Steve Jordan, who's a fantastic drummer, huge influence on me, and he actually recommended me for a lot of things. So in those days, you could just get recommended for stuff. If you met somebody and they happened to think you had potential, and that person was hooked up, then that's all you needed. You know, I've never had a manager, never had an agent. My whole career really is just word of mouth. And so it's funny because both for Bruce Springsteen and Billy Joel, I could really credit Steve Jordan, I think, because I heard that he had put my name in the hat when Bruce was doing his auditions for drummers, and that's how that happened. And then he was going to do the River of Dreams album with Danny Korchmar, but something came up and he couldn't do it. So again, he said, why don't you use Zach? And so I got thrown into there too. So it's really all just been word of mouth, which is hard to do now. I mean, it's funny, you'd think now it would be easier because we have the internet, but I think there's just too many voices on the internet now, so it's kind of like, how do you... But, you know, a lot of people are making their careers on YouTube right now, so that's the new way.
Yeah, it's the new way. It's changed a lot, yeah.
Yeah.
So talking about David Bowie, Billy Joel, Bruce Springsteen, what would you say were the difference for you in working as a drummer for them?
Well, it just depends on the musical style that they do, because of course I have my own sound, but I try to adapt as well to different situations. So I think when you have drummers who just practice one style, it's not their thing. They're not going to get the call to play with this guy and play with that guy and play with this guy and that guy. So I've always been a more well-rounded kind of player, but it's not like I have really learnt a lot of other styles. I just can relate to other styles. I find it easy to relate to them. It feels natural to me to play funk or to play rock or to play pop or to play electronic. Like all that stuff just kind of comes, and so Bruce, for example, a lot of those drum parts were created by Max Weinberg over years of working with Bruce, and so I couldn't really change that too much. You know, that would have been inappropriate. So I pretty much stuck to the script and kept true to Max's parts and just played them with my attitude and my energy. David, on the other hand, he wanted to change everything. When I joined his band, he was doing a tour where he was mixing elements of jungle and rock together and electronica, and so we were playing a lot of his back catalog, and he wanted to change everything. So I followed the script very loosely in that sense to all the drummers who had come before me then, and it was pretty much open for me to interpret as I wanted to, given the clues that David was laying out for us to follow, because he wanted something new and different, and he didn't know exactly what it was going to be either. He just throws things together, and he just knows what stimuli to put here and there to get an interesting result. And then he's pretty much happy with whatever it is. It's not like he gets picky about stuff. The B-52s, I just grew up listening to that music, and you just have to play it really straight and really, I would almost say aggressively. And so that's the way I approach that. So every situation's been different, and those have been my approaches.
So different challenges, you know.
Yeah, and and then you want to consider again what the artist's background is, because like Bruce, his background is really coming out of like soul and R&B, and at the same time folk, and so whenever we would play songs of his that weren't so iconic, I would think about those influences that maybe led him to write that song and try and, infuse a little bit of that into it as well. if I knew it.
It's interesting you mentioned the soul aspect in Bruce's songs, because not too long ago Steven Van Zandt was performing in Stuttgart here.
Mm-hmm.
And I went there and
Disciples of Soul.
Exactly,
Yeah.
And you realized how much of soul music is
Exactly.
there.
You know, it's not evident on the surface,
Yeah.
but after like touring with him, and every time we would party on the bus or have an after-show party somewhere, it was always spinning soul records. You know, it was always Curtis Mayfield and the Impressions. It was always Sam and Dave. It was always this kind of stuff. And then I began to hear it in his music after that. You know, before, it's not always so evident. You know, a few songs like Hungry Heart,
Mm-hmm.
or you know, some that sometimes they seem like, oh, that's a different sounding kind of
Mhm.
song, but you know, yeah.
There's this cliche, sort of this cliche argument between a regular band musician and studio cats, saying that being a studio musician like you mostly are, or like a hired gun, as they say, it's all about precision, and the others, for them, it's much more about creativity, you know, which is always kind of, you know, yeah. I don't subscribe to it personally, but what is your take? What is your take on it?
I think I started out much more in the creativity camp, and as I've grown as a drummer, I've gone more into the precision camp. And so that's the one thing I'm always working on, is becoming more and more precise. But at the same time, there's still that original voice in my head for creativity that always wants me to play something different, always wants me to play something that someone else didn't play, or do it in a way that's a little bit different. And so no matter how perfect and precise I want to be, I'll always throw something in there to kind of like, you know, unsettle things a little bit.
So you are perfectly okay if somebody calls you precise, right?
Oh yeah, that's a huge compliment. In fact, I take that, you know, whenever I can get it, because it surprises me when people say that.
So was there anything particular for you that you take with you from working with Tony Visconti or the other David Bowie producers, or Danny Kochman, that you that you learned from working with them?
Yeah, I mean, one thing you learn is the dynamic of what your role is. I think a lot of artists, especially now that they're not necessarily having the same type of experience playing with lots of different musicians, and because of YouTube, you can do a lot more learning and practicing on your own, you know, just watching videos and stuff. I think it's really important to understand that you are not an island, and you are not irreplaceable, and you are not necessarily your vision. You should be ready to compromise, and that's the thing I've learned from working with all these producers, is how to do what they want from you. That's what you're there for. Ultimately, even if they got you because they thought you have a certain sound or a certain vibe, once you get in the studio, what you got to do is get results. And so if it doesn't gel, you just can't be, you know, like, oh, well, you know, that wasn't my thing or whatever. You have to do whatever it is that the artist wants. And sometimes it's just really, really playing something basic and simple is the best thing, and it makes the song work.
So when you're drumming with Nena, do you what is the how different are the songs? For example, do you use click track on many songs, or just a few, or how does it work?
We're using click track on most of the songs right now.
Okay.
There's a couple that we don't, but Yeah, the click track is. I personally love playing with a click track because it's actually less for me to think about. You know, I mean, unless it's a band that I've been in for years, it can be tricky getting the right tempo for every song. And then if they change the set order, that changes your whole reference too, and then the tempos are even harder to access. So I love working with the click because you never have to even think about what the tempo is. It's given to you.
So with Nena, that's the main purpose of the click track, or is it because there are some sort of sequences running?
Yeah,
also?
we have some sequences running too.
Okay, okay.
Not a ton of stuff, but
okay.
Some songs a bit more than others, and a lot of stuff that you think is sequences played too. So
okay.
so it's really mostly played, but there is some enhancement going on in the background, and occasionally there'll be some sequencers in the background. So what was your question?
Yeah, just about the click track and how much is it used on the Nena tour?
Yeah, we got about 2 or 3 songs where we don't use it, but most everything else.
Okay. So you disagree with Ringo Starr at this point, because Ringo Starr, I don't know if you know, once said, "I am the fucking click track." I read this a few years ago.
Yeah, that's a great quote. I mean, like in the Nena set, for example, we have a part where we. This is a bit of a spoiler, but probably we've done enough shows that everybody knows by now. We actually leave the stage and we sneak out to a little, what we call the punk stage, out in the middle of the venue, which is tiny. I mean, it's much smaller than this terrace right here, and we're all crammed on there, and we just play these other songs of her, just bass, drums, and guitar. She's playing guitar, and we're doing it with this really wild punk energy. Of course, there's no click, so. In that case, we wanted it to be loose and raw and as punky as possible.
Cool. So when you are in the studio, do you ever yourself program drum tracks? Is that something you do?
No.
You don't?
No, I used to a long time ago with drum machines and stuff, but
okay. I was just wondering because I was talking to Omar Hakim a few weeks ago, and actually I was talking with his wife, Rachel, and he came to the interview at the very end because they were playing in Munich and they had a jazz club gig going on, and he is kind of into programming also. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and he's also endorsing the role in electronic drums.
Exactly,
so, yeah,
exactly. And he briefly talked about what he did with Daft Punk in France.
Yeah.
And that was interesting because he said he played like for hours, and what they did, they recorded his playing. And I hope he doesn't kill me for saying that now when he listens to it. I hope I put it correctly. And he said they just took like they ended up taking like measures out of this and put this back together. He kept like playing for a long time, and they used that sort of as samples, and put this back together. I found this kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's the way we make music these days. It's not in linear fashion anymore. It's really kind of like random access. You can take stuff from anywhere and put it, and it's a great way to work. I mean. I think it's not too different from stuff David's done in the past too. Not necessarily with drum tracks. I think on the Outside record he did it more that way, but just with lyrics and with song ideas, he likes to throw things together and use every tool available.
Right. So after this tour with Nena, what comes next for you? Anything you can give away? What is going to?
Yes, I'll be in Japan touring with Hote Tomoyasu from October to January. So
Okay.
for anybody going over to
Very good.
Tokyo or Osaka or Fukuoka or anywhere,
Okay.
we'll be there.
And is there anything you do like as in terms of like a solo project or solo band or things like that?
You know, I had a project called Media that unfortunately is kind of on ice at the moment. I would love to get back and do some more with those people. It's Galen Dorsey on bass, David Barron on keyboards, and Danny Bloom on guitar. But schedules haven't allowed it. Everybody's been too busy.
I see. Galen Dorsey was the bass player with David Bowie, right?
Yes.
Okay, so Zachary, thanks a lot for the interview. It's very insightful. And I wish you all the best for the rest of the Nena tour and all the projects that you have coming up.
Well, thanks a lot to you. That was a pleasure.